Good morning. Thank you very much for being here on the second day. We've got a whole bunch of really exciting things. I am Matt Butcher.
I am Matt Fisher.
Just so you can, and of course, yeah, as in every Helm public dev call, you just say Matt and everybody is listening. So, because there are three of us, right? I wanted to start out with a couple of just kind of housekeeping-y things that I feel like we ought to do. The first one is I'd like to kind of have three distinct groups of people, kind of be acknowledged, and also you have a chance to meet them. The first one is the people who actually started the Helm project. Okay, so the initial group of three people. Remus, I know you're here. There you are. Can you stand up for a second? And yeah, so the three of us that got started with it. Jack Francis will be here a little bit later on today. So say hi to Remus, say hi to Jack when he gets here. The second group I'd like to introduce you to are the Helm core maintainers and the emeritus Helm core maintainers. So if you're one of those people, please stand up. I know a bunch of you are up here in the front. These are the people who are day-to-day, and one way back in the back, Justin. These are the people who day-to-day, dedicate their time and energy and resources to keeping the project on track. Chart maintainers are standing up too, right? Yeah, okay, there's the chart maintainers. And they keep things on track, do the day-to-day development, answer lots of questions. In fact, I'd like to ask you to give them a round of applause for all the hard work they've done. And the third group of people that I would like to stand up if you can is anybody who hangs out on any of the Helm Slack channels, okay? So any of you, please stand up. I'm serious about this. This is one of the things that I feel like makes our community remarkable. And when we set out to build Helm, the real reason that we set out was because we wanted to make Kubernetes an easier project to use. And there are, of course, technical boundaries, right? We all have hit the what have I gotten myself into moment with Kubernetes. And we wanted to address those in Helm, but we also wanted to address a lot of the social aspects of this, right? To create a space where people would be able to come in and ask questions that they felt, like they might sound stupid asking. And those of you who have hung out in the Helm Slack channels, I watch the interactions all the time. You guys are like fabulous, fabulous ambassadors for this community. I've seen so many people come in feeling frustrated and angry, and seen people in the Slack channel diffuse it, right? And say, okay, yeah, we've had that problem, let's help you through it. I've seen people welcome people in who felt uncomfortable. That to me is probably the strongest aspect of our community. So please give a round of applause to all the people standing here, all the people connecting via the live stream too. Thank you guys very much. And then finally, there is a man behind the curtains in the Helm community. This person has been here since day one, and as far as I know, has never been on stage, been to maybe one public dev call, but he's done lots and lots of very, very important work. Today, he's connecting on the live stream. His name is Ronan Flynn Curran, and he's the one who has done all of the design work for us. He built the website that hosts the documentation. So please give him a round of applause too. I know he'd like to be here, but he rarely gets the acknowledgement due for the amount of work he has put in this community. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's start by talking about yesterday. What do you think of yesterday? What was the TIL for you yesterday?
For me, I think the TIL there was a lot of really, really interesting and engaging user stories that a lot of people brought up. It wasn't just like people coming up with vendor pitches and doing that stuff, but I saw a lot of people who were coming up with problems in Kubernetes, or not just with Kubernetes, but just solving these problems with their applications and coming up with either different tools around Helm or different tools in the Kubernetes ecosystem that would help them solve those problems. You saw that a lot, like Nicole Hubbard, who did her talk on WordPress Engine, and Lostromos and doing all that stuff over there. Greg Taylor, wherever you are, in the far corner. All the talks that we had at KubeCon about different stuff like with Draft and whatnot, but you were also talking about like with Cage and with Kev, and the whole tooling that you're doing with like the Reddit engineering team just to get them onto Kubernetes and what stuff. I think those were like the most interesting talks for me that I saw that were happening yesterday. What about yourself?
Yeah, I felt the same. I felt really stretched in the way I understood how people were using Helm in different environments. right? And just to hear like Rod and then Brian and then shortly after Greg and hear three very different ways that that workflows had been built around Helm. And then I really appreciated Rod pointing out some of the pain points at the end of your presentation. There you are. Because that was like a chance to say, okay, this is someone who has done some really difficult work with it, and now I understand very clearly, more so than in the issue queue, right? We try and keep an eye on the issue queue, but it's hard to understand when we see a bug report, how is this actually impacting somebody's life or some particular team's work? And I really appreciated the fact that Rod could walk through this big picture view of it and then kind of wind up by saying, and here are the exact stress points that we have had to deal with because of this. And then I had this like sort of gestalt shift moment, right, where I went, oh, okay. Now I've got the big picture view and I can understand exactly why those things are frustrating. But yeah, I had a great day yesterday. That was a lot of fun.
Totally agree.
So we should talk about today's plan?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the discussion was very interesting about that. So that was hopefully fueling a lot of really interesting discussion. There's going to be some lightning talks that'll be happening shortly after this keynote. And then after that, we'll be doing kind of like an open Q&A with the Helm core maintainers. It's not just the core maintainers, but also charts maintainers. So everyone can just come along on the stage along here and ask any questions. Easy questions, hard questions. Why are things broken? Or why can't it do certain things, X, Y, Z? We'll have all these discussions, and any questions are available and happy to answer.
Yep.
So, yeah. And then after that, I'll be kind of kicking off the working groups for that. So we'll have a discussion around how we're going to do that and just talk about different topics that you want to bring up. There was a lot of interesting topics that, next slide anyways, about how like there's improving the chart infrastructure for testing. There was the future of the common chart, which was something that you were interested about, that you contributed a while ago. You're seeing some use cases around the common chart. As well as like, there was a lot of discussions around like chart museum and chart repositories and how you store those artifacts and whatnot. So there'll be a lot of interesting discussion, I think, around that. And just like review process and yeah, just general Helm development or any future crazy ideas that anyone has here at the thing. So I hope you come up with some really fantastic ideas for having some really good discussions. So, yeah.
And that's it, right? We don't have anything else to talk about at the summit here, do we, today?
We're done.
Yeah, so... And now that we're with Microsoft, we're gonna introduce the Helm 3 SQL Server Edition today. No, I'm just kidding. Please don't fire me. It's a joke. This afternoon we're gonna kick off, or actually late this morning, right? We're gonna kick off some of the discussions about Helm 3 because this is our first chance in almost a year and a half to actually make some breaking changes to Helm. And this means that finally we have a chance to kind of catch up with many of the developments that happened in Kubernetes after we made our stability guarantees, right? So CRDs were not there when we stabilized our APIs.
Rollback or role-based access control was like really alpha when Helm 2 originally came out. So it'll be a lot of interesting, or not interesting, it'll be a lot of fun discussions. Yeah,
so I'm looking forward to this. Matt and I wanted to kind of kick it off by explaining what the goal of this particular exercise is. And so we kind of wrote this short statement to kind of explain it. The goal of the Helm 3 initiative, this whole effort here, is to continue our efforts to build a package manager for Kubernetes. That was really the way we described things when we started, and we want to stay true to that. And we want to do it by modernizing Helm based on what all these great emerging practices, best practices, and new technologies that are there. So that's kind of how we want to do it. We want to kind of avoid the expansion into other realms and stay true to the vision, but we want this chance to really kind of...
To come back to what things and what the industry has come around of Kubernetes and what are the best practices around deploying applications and packaging them up.
Yeah. So the outcome for today, as far as the planning goes, and you'll circle back to this when you introduce all of this later on this afternoon. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But our goal is to walk out of the summit with the answer to the question, what do we view as the requirements for Helm 3? So we want to really focus on user stories, right? And answering the question, I as a DevOps person would like Helm to whatever. or I find it frustrating that Helm does this particular thing and wish that I could accomplish this, or something like this, so that we can continue to refine what Helm does based on your actual needs, and not, there's a tendency to solutioneer, as Lockheed likes to say, where we start saying, what solutions do we have, or what cool technologies do we have available to us, and how can we use that hammer to nail different things down?
Yeah.
So we would really, and again, as you get into it later this afternoon, you'll give concrete.
Yeah,
steps
absolutely.
on that,
We'll get into some more concrete ideas into stuff like that for sure.
There are a couple things that we felt like we wanted to call out up here on stage that we understood and had heard loud and clear, and wanted to make sure that we committed to up front, so that we could at least relieve some anxiety about it.
Yeah, so the Helm community is absolutely massive, and I think one of the biggest backing things right now has been the community charts. This simple idea of being able to go to Helm or go to Kubernetes and be able to say like Helm install Jenkins, or Helm install Traffic, or Helm install Prometheus. That idea has been really, really interesting, or has been, I always say interesting, but there's been so many charts that have been made and so much contributions that have been made by the community that we just don't want to immediately come into a Helm 3 and suddenly that entire ecosystem has to basically turn itself on its own head in order to create an entire, or a second ecosystem, essentially. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to retain backwards compatibility with Helm 2's existing charts. So what that means is that we want to make sure that they're installable. The chart repos that exist today, we want to make sure that they can still be usable in Helm 3, but we also want to write like a nice migration path for people who want to write charts for Helm 3. We also want to have a nice migration path for people who are hosting chart repositories. And the basic user interaction should be generally more or less the same for people. So like Helm install, Helm upgrade, and that kind of stuff.
Right, and this isn't to say that we won't allow any changes to the charts format or anything like that. We just want to make sure that we have the backward compatibility layer in there. This is why we versioned a lot of that stuff when we started. So we want to assure people that there will be a soft transition path from Helm 2 to Helm 3, and not one of these where, the DevOps team has to pull 3 weekends worth of all-nighters in order to get something migrated from one to the other.
Yeah, exactly. So then there was also the backwards compatibility, but then there was also some frequently discussed topics that probably a lot of people in the Helm community are quite aware of. So there was there's some deprecated features inside of Helm over a long period of time that it's been a year and a half, or has it been 2 years? So there's a lot of like old dead code, or there's some old gRPC APIs that we've had to retain for backwards compatibility. This is a fantastic opportunity to refactor code. So if any of you love refactoring code or writing tests, this is a great time to get in. Then there's also CRDs for release objects. There's been a lot of interesting discussion around like changing Tiller as a Helm operator, operating on CRDs. I know there's been some discussion in the working group, application definition working group, about, and also I think SIG architecture, about like the application manifest and whatnot. So there's some interesting discussions around there, around that stuff. So it'll be another interesting topic. And of course, improving the security story. So like RBAC, what were the other things? Authentication, authorization inside of Kubernetes itself, and making Helm respect the new policies and whatnot that have happened over many releases.
Right, yeah, Lockheed talked about the security yesterday, and people often ask us, well, why isn't it turned on by default? And answer number one is, much of this stuff wasn't here when we started working on it. And the second part of that answer is we guaranteed to people, and we take the guarantee very seriously, that if you script up your CI/CD environment to say Helm init, you can rely release to release that it will still perform the same way. And but now is that time when we can say, all right, is there a sensible, somebody called it easy security yesterday. I liked that particular quip. Is there a sensible, easy security path that we can take? And also, what other things can we add on now that we're don't exist today on that front?
Yeah.
I know this is one of your favorite topics.
This is, I'm really interested in a commitment to documentation for Helm 3. So if you look at any of the big major projects in the open source that have kind of, I can hear a little bit of snickering 10 seconds later. So there was a lot of interesting a lot of major programming languages or major software releases that have come out. But basically, documentation is probably one of the most important things that comes out in a major release. A lot of people are interested not just in like what has changed between one version to the next, but they're also interested in like migrating use cases over. Like, how do I do configuration management with like Helm, or how do I do like a Helm install -- set, which a lot of people are using today, or stuff like that, or how do I do an upgrade of Tiller, or these kind of use cases would be all very valuable and very interesting things that we all need to document. So I think this is like a really great time, and we were hearing like from day one, we were hearing a lot of really nice use cases from a bunch of people saying like, this is how I do, or this is how I use Helm, and this is how I go to production with Helm. And I think what we need to do as a community together is to try and bring up a document saying that these are all the use cases that we do with Helm 2, and what can we do for Helm 3 to make it easier and a smoother process to people to migrate over, so that it's a clear understanding of not just why are we changing things the way they are, but also why are they moving in this way, and why is it better than the existing system?
Yeah, I like the part yesterday. Was it Brian? I've forgotten now who talked about the personas for documentation. And I know that Kubernetes.io has gone a little ways toward trying to introduce the idea of personas as a way of categorizing documentation.
Right, yeah.
And that was something that oftentimes, as the primary developers on the project, it's hard for us to totally cast ourselves into the role of somebody that does something we don't, right? So this is one of those areas that I think is a great place for people to help us develop the personas, and then say, even if it's just coming up with the list of which pieces of documentation are relevant to that particular persona, and then we can enlist other people to write them. That kind of effort is something that I think if we start it alongside of the Helm 3 initiative, will mean that we can have a robust set of documentation for all those other people that are entering the community at that particular time.
Yeah, exactly. The touch points of someone who's like a site reliability engineer can be completely different compared to someone who's an evangelist for Kubernetes or something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I hadn't realized until someone said it yesterday how much tribal knowledge floats through Slack, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure we got that documented somewhere. And Slack is good for many, many things, but recovering, somebody else's thoughts from 3 weeks ago is not one of them.
Dash sets, parser, logic, yeah, for sure.
Well, and the strong point of our community has for a long time been the high amount of engagement. I've worked on some good, successful open source projects that had tiny little communities, and the core developers worked in an echo chamber largely, and we happened to get lucky in some cases and actually build the kinds of things that were useful. But this community is a very different kind of community. Because we've grown alongside of Kubernetes itself, right? And we're adapting and to kind of the changing architecture, the changing best practices. We're also, all of you in this room have been strong influencers on what people are considering to be the best practices. Right? We saw that yesterday as people stand up and say, this is how I have set up this particular cluster. This is how my team runs a complex set of applications. And I know that for every one story we heard on stage, there are a dozen of you out in the audience who have similar stories, right? And not all of them are happy success stories. Some of them are, you guys have done incredibly innovative things, right? But we are shaping the way that others out there in the broader Kubernetes community are starting to look at design patterns and things like that. And that's something that we should, take responsibility and a certain amount of pride in, because you have done that kind of thing and then are figuring out ways of explaining to each other, we've found this to be highly reliable. We've been really frustrated by this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So as we go into this project, that's why it's so important to us with Helm 3 to hear from you and have you say, these are user stories that I have. These are requirements I would love to have satisfied. These are things I just get very frustrated with. I'm not even sure what the right approach would be. But then there's this opposite danger. So my favorite book is Moby Dick. It's been for a long time. And I was reading it and found a quote the other night that was like hilarious because I'm trying to get this keynote all prepped up. And I'm like, wow, one quote that has both Helm and Tiller in it. And it's exactly what I wanted to say. So Ishmael is on the Pequod, the boat, right? And they're working on reducing, believe it or not, reducing whale fat because he's working on a whaling sailing boat, and they've got this big fire built up in the middle of the boat. And they're working on trying to do this while Ishmael is supposed to be steering the boat. And he gets sidetracked. He's kind of gazing into the fire, and he lets go of the helm of the boat. And is kind of just standing there and zones out, essentially, right? And then he realizes his mistake and realizes the boat is now off course because he wasn't paying attention. And he says, never dream with your hand on the helm. Turn not thy back to the compass, accept the first hint of the hitching tiller, feel the tiller moving. And don't believe in the artificial fire when its redness makes all things look ghastly. And the point is, he got so distracted by the shiny object over there that he lost sight of his goal. And anytime we go into this kind of re-architecting moment, right, there's this tendency to start to lose sight of the goal and get distracted by the shiny stuff. And so I thought this quote was just like a great way to remind us all, these user stories are a good way to help us keep our hand on the helm and listen to the tiller. So now everybody wants to know the $1 million question, right? So what's the timeline? So Fisher and I pulled off a little magic moment here. Here's the timeline, and you'll notice something missing from this timeline.
What are we missing?
It's just a line.
Yeah. So starting today, the kickoff. So basically, this is kind of like the introduction to talking about these discussions, having these working groups, bringing in, collaborating on these ideas. And so basically what will happen after this kickoff, two things. There'll be like two timelines that'll be kicking off at the same time. Because Helm 2 is still rapidly being used in production, is still successful, and everyone else is still using it. So we'd like to still release 2.9, continue maintaining the release, doing patches and whatnot, and maintaining it for an indeterminate amount of time until it feels comfortable. Until we're basically comfortable with putting it on maintenance mode and letting it sail off to sea. And during that time, the kickoff, which we'll be kind of doing like focus groups and doing coding and getting that stuff, which will then come to an Alpha 1, which we believe will be like kind of like a final Helm 3, which is still like you can make changes here and there. A beta, which will be like a staging idea of like we think this is ready to go.
And then probably about the time when we'll start saying this stuff is frozen. The APIs are frozen.
Yeah, exactly. And that'll be about the time where it'll be like documentation. It'll be around the idea where we start saying like, okay, these are the December contracts for 3.0, and reaffirming those ideas back again so then people can come along into the project and start seeing those ideas.
And then when it comes to the 2.0 branch, right, we will continue releasing as long as the 3.0 one is going. We will unless some of this is going to depend on how massive the feature list is.
Right. Yeah.
If the feature list ends up being the kind of thing where we're going, it's realistically going to take us over a year to develop Helm 3. Then we will begin triaging which features we want to actually make available and then which non-breaking features we want to make available in the 2 branch. But if we feel like we bite off a manageable workload and we can do it fast, then we will deprioritize features in the 2 branch and try and prioritize adding the features directly to 3 and accelerating the 3.0 milestone essentially by putting more engineering resources focused on that.
Right. And a lot of that can be from the working groups or ongoing discussions too, and that can largely depend on that timeline based on what are the core focuses for 3.0.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Swift bombing happens with remarkable frequency in most of our discussions. So, so this is really where we wanted to leave off this morning. We wanted to kind of cast a little bit of a vision here about what we're thinking of, and really make it clear to everybody here that our goal with Helm 3 is to partner with all the people who have already dedicated time, resources, and energy to learning all about Helm and all about Kubernetes and figure out how we can really make an advancement, right? Some steps in usability to continue to make Helm the tool that is the package manager for Kubernetes. All right, thank you all very much. We're looking forward to some lightning talks coming up next. All right.
Yep.